Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, as part of our family prayer, we are reading the book of Matthew, and we are in the book at chapter 27. So I think we studied about the portion from Matthew chapter 26, and there is a little description about the Last Supper Jesus had. So that is in verse 17 to verse 35. And I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts from what we learned out of our family prayer, and just want to share a couple of thoughts. So I will read from verse 17, and I'll not read all the way to verse 35, but probably a couple of verses I'll read, which talks about the Last Supper, the supper which Jesus took before he went on the cross, the last dinner he had with disciples. So Matthew chapter 26, and from verse 17, and I'm reading from KJV, verse 17, Now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, Where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? And he said, Go into the city to such a man, and say unto him, The Master saith, My time is at hand, I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciples. And the disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Now when the even was come, he sat down with the 12, and as they did eat, he said, Verily I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? And he answered and said, He that dippeth his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. The Son of Man goeth, as it is written of him, but woe unto that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. Then Judas, which betrayed him, answered and said, Master, is it I? He said unto him, Thou hast said. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and blessed it, and brake it, and gave it to the disciples, and said, Take it, this is my body. And he took the cup, and gave thanks, and gave it to them, saying, Drink ye all of it. For this is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many, for the remission of sins. But I say unto you, I will not drink henceforth of this fruit of the vine, until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Now, here is the little description about disciples. They were asking Jesus that where should be the Last Supper. In verse 17, disciples came and they wanted to have the last dinner, and they said that they asked Jesus that where do you think we should have the dinner? And Jesus, what he answered was surprising to me when I read that. I read this portion many times, but I think God revealed something to me out of this portion which I never paid attention. I have never read about it anywhere. I haven't heard any sermon on it. And but I was just reading, and this is what, it just took me by amazement. Jesus said, Go into the city to such a man, and say unto him, The Master saith, My time is at hand, I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciple. And disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. So what Jesus here did was probably surprising to disciples as well, and it is surprising to us as well. Jesus said that go into a city to such a man. Now, think about this. This man in whose house Jesus is taking his last dinner, probably this man, in our thoughts, in our opinion, he is the privileged person. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the most popular person of his time. Popular not in the terms of the way the people are popular today, or the preachers even are popular today. I'm talking about the way people knew him as a prophet, and the way the chief priest and the other scribes, they knew him as their kind of an enemy. And in that sense, Jesus was popular. And this man, the person about whom Jesus is talking about, that he will take his dinner there or the Last Supper there, that person's name is not mentioned. And that was surprising to me at first time. And only the other time, the person's name is not mentioned by Jesus, who was really handpicked by Jesus, but that person's name is not mentioned. It is at the triumphant entry Jesus had in Jerusalem, and he told his disciples to go to such a person's house and take his donkey with the colt. And that person's name is also not mentioned. And so we were just thinking about it and studying about it. And it was such a great to learn that there are times when God picks up the person for his service, and those persons' names are never mentioned. The service which God took from them, it is memorable. Nobody can, forget the Palm Sunday. We celebrate, almost all the Christians, they celebrate Palm Sunday every year. And the person who is attached to that person's name is not there. And that's an honor, to be useful to God. But then being, unanonymous, sometimes that becomes very challenging in our Christian life. This person in whose house Jesus took Last Supper, that person's name is not there. It never came into any book. It never came into history. And we don't know who this person's name is. But we know one thing, that he must be a very close friend of Jesus. He must be, really Jesus must have trusted him. And Jesus must have known him personally. And the same for the person of whose donkey Jesus used for his triumphant entry in Jerusalem. And this is the great lesson we learn, that in today's world, and probably not just today, throughout the history, there are people who have struggled and who have, fought their way to be known, sometimes even as a minister. There are people who just wants to have their name everywhere, that they are the organizer of such and such program, they are the ministry leaders, they are the directors, and this and that. And don't, misunderstand me. I'm not saying that all the people who are popular are the people who look for the popularity. No, Jesus also was popular, but Jesus never looked for the popularity. And there are times, when God allows such and such person to be known. But, I believe that the people who are unknown is also a huge number of people. And when we'll go to heaven, we will be just surprised that we might find somebody whom God honors more than the person we thought that God should honor. And we might know some person doing a great ministry, preaching to the great crowd and big crowd, and every Sunday he's preaching, and probably he goes out throughout the world to preach, and everybody knows him. But when we go to heaven, probably we might find someone else, never known, completely unknown person. And Jesus presents him as his most useful person, whom he used on this earth. So this is the lesson we learn, that Jesus, he called out for a person without calling his name, and he used him. And there are two occasions which we just saw. And so, dear brothers and sisters in Christ, there are times, not just times, I think this is how our heart should be. And I'm 46 years old now, and I have seen a lot of confrontation in the church, lot of problems in the church, because somebody wanted his name to be pronounced, or his name to be announced, or his name to have some, the title attached to it. And he wanted to be recognized in the church. And that's where I think we sometimes make a big mistake. If we are a true follower of Christ, we would not be worried about our name. Because Jesus repeatedly said, even in the Sermon on Mount, right? Jesus repeatedly said that your reward is in heaven. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And we forget. We forget that our reward is in heaven. We forget that our Father who is seeing in secret, we just wants to be known. And I'm not talking about the unbelievers. I'm talking about the Christian leaders. I'm talking about the believers. I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about some of the people I have known personally, that if their name is not in the front, if it's not been announced, they become upset and they think that nobody recognized him. But I think this is what God personally taught me, and he taught in our family prayers to all four of us, that the sacrificial, the ministry and the service to the Lord is precious. And God will honor that probably far more than the person who has done the ministry throughout his life, that he may be known, that he may be heard, that he may be recognized, and that he may be awarded. And I doubt that their works will burn away. That verse says that everyone's work will go through fire, and somebody's work will stay, and some people's work will burnt away like a grass. And I think when we don't follow the Lord, when we don't serve the Lord with all of our heart and with all complete sacrifice, I think our work will burn away. And all the labor we thought throughout the life that we are doing a great job for the Lord, even people confirm sometimes that, brother, sister, you're doing a great job for the Lord. And that work will burn away. What a great loss it would be. So I think the secret of serving the Lord is not being known. And this principle, when the worldly people, probably some of my non-Christian friends, when they would listen to this, they would say that, what's the profit? But you and I are follower of Christ, and we don't look for the name. And if we walk by this principle, not just in our walk with God, but probably if you are, or myself, when we are in our secular world, in a professional world, working in the secular people, this will help us. We don't have to look for the name even at our job. We don't need to, because the Father who is seeing in secret, and he never fails to see that. People might fail to see that, People might put you behind the curtain, but the God who sees in secret and no curtain stops him to see, he will see. And in due time, he will lift you up. And he will lift me up. So the great, great lesson which we need to learn here is that the service which is done in secret, service which is done without any hint of demand of recognition, is precious in the sight of the Lord. And God will honor that. God has honored that. So many people, and God will honor that. So may God help us to understand this divine principle of not looking for the recognition. And I believe that this is a great problem in our Christianity today. People wants to be known, and sometimes it's so visible, it's so, you can easily make it out that some people, all they do, probably they are looking, they take the God's name to be known. And that's something very sad, very sad. And we should never do that. So may God help us to understand this blessed and glorious Christian principle in our life.